Hi, and welcome to Tuesday's Tips. Today I have Jeanette with me, and she's going to help me because we are doing a 3-part series, and today's part 1 of bench pillows. How many of you love bench pillows? They are so much fun. So I wanted to start out by asking a question, and just be thinking about this while we're going. Have you ever done the bench pillows, first of all? And if you have, what else have you made your bench pillow maybe into? A table runner, wall hanging? Tell me what you've done with that. And let us know if you have any questions while we're doing this whole session, because we're happy to answer any questions right off the bat. Then you get your answer just like that. So I'm going to turn the time over to Jeanette. She's going to just quickly kind of explain an overview of what we have sitting out over here. You can see that we start out with we've got our sewing version of the autumn bench pillow. And
Perfect.
We've got,
So the bench pillows come in machine embroidery and sewing. So these are our sewing patterns and how those would look on your the shelf at the store. And then here's the machine embroidery versions that come in the CDs. So the idea with the bench pillow is that you make one pillow form, our little tags. There's one pillow form, and it's a cover that goes over the pillow form, and you just replace it every month or season. And then you just make the cover itself, and you don't have to store a whole bunch of stuff. They fold really nice and flat. Just a really nice statement piece in your house on a bench or on a bed.
So much, yeah, that's a great idea. They're so much fun. And I know that we've got some bench pillows that we've put in some other products as well.
Yes.
And we'll talk about those in a minute. But to start out with today, the reason I have the autumn bench pillow out is, guess what we're gonna make? The autumn bench pillow. That is the sewing version, but we are going to make the embroidery version. So to get started, the first thing that you're going to want to do is determine which hoop size you're going to be using in order to make this, because obviously you're going to need to multi-hoop. Your machine isn't going to be big enough for that whole thing. So as you can see, maybe the squirrel over there, the squirrel was made in a hoop, and part of welcome depending on your hoop size. So the first thing that we want to talk about today is hoop size, your hoop size requirements. So we've got our computers up here, because I'm going to start from the very beginning. When you put your disc in, that's what I've got here, and this is the first thing that comes up on the newer files are just arranged differently, but this is the first thing that would come up. And if I double click on that, it's going to show me these are my 2 options. Do I have 6x10 hoops or smaller, or do I have a 9x14 hoops or smaller or equivalent? It doesn't have to be that exact one, but it needs to be at least that size or smaller. This is the hoop size that you're going to need though to make part of it. So you're going to have a hoop that's at least a 6x10 if you're doing the 6x10 version. If you want to make the 9x14 version, there's just less hoopings, obviously, in the larger hoop, but you would need to have at least a 9x14 or small. That would be your largest one, and then you can obviously have smaller ones. So I'm going to let Jeanette show you. This is on the Mac, and she's going to show you on the Windows version.
Okay, so I actually
have
have
the files.
2 windows open, because we actually we've released the CD. The files are exactly the same, but some of our older CDs, we've just reorganized how the files are on the disc when we've just been reordering. And so your disc might look like this, where it opens with all 4 of those folders, or it might open like Gloria showed you with just the 2 folders. So this is just the newer version, but the files are all the same. I just organized them in different folders, so it's just a little easier for people to understand.
Yeah.
But all the same files are on the disc.
Okay. So to determine which one you're going to use, today I'm just going to show you, the first thing you would do is print out your instructions. But first you've got to determine which set of instructions you're going to print out. At the top it will show whether you're going to use a 6x10 if you printed out the 6x10 set of instructions, because they are slightly different than the 9x14 set of instructions, because you're going to be hooping just slightly different and making different marks. So it's really important to figure that out very first. Now, the most confusing thing, I think, is even though you use a 6x10 inch hoop for some of it, Sometimes you're going to be using a 5x7 hoop. Sometimes you're going to use a 4x4 inch hoop or a 5x7. You can see there's different hoop sizes, but the largest size, as you can see here, is 6x10. That's why this is considered 6x10 inch hoop, because that's the largest required hoop for this particular set of instructions. Now I'm going to show you in comparison with the 9x14. When you print out these instructions, you can see, oh, I use a 6x10 and 8x12 inch hoop and my 9x14 inch hoop. So you can see there's still different hoop sizes, but the largest required hoop size is the 9x14 in order to make it with this set of instructions. So if you have any questions, are there any questions on that so far?
I haven't. Nope.
All right.
You heard Deb says, been afraid to try this, so I'm enjoying this video.
Oh, good. I think once you find just how to do it step by step, it takes the worry out, it takes the stress out, and you can just go to town having fun making the bench pillows. So thank you for joining us today. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to show you on my screen how I would go about printing out my instructions, and then Jeanette's going to show you on the windows how you would go about doing the same thing. So as you can see, my disc is still in there. I'm going to select 6x10. I just double click on it, and then right here it says directions, embroidery files. Those are the files that we're going to use to stitch out. This is for hand tracing the PDF files, and this is SVG. Yes, there is SVG cutting files for the embroidery version. Is there for the sewing version?
No.
No. The sewing version, we will show you how to do that on our Part 3 series. I'm so excited to show you that. So if I go to directions, I'm going to double click on directions, and as you can see, the top one, there's how you would stitch your leaves out. These instructions are how you would make the autumn banner. If you can see that up on the pillow a little bit. And the next one is your actual full set of instructions that we're going to be working with today. So I would double click on that, and it would take a second probably to pull up. Oh no, it didn't. It came right up. And as you can see right here at the top, it says 6x10 inch. So I know I've got the right set of instructions. And for my Mac, I just go to File, go to Print, and I would send it to my printer and print these out. And that is how I would print out this set of instructions right here that we're going to go over.
Okay.
I'm going to let Jeanette go over the same thing.
So perfect on PC. So I'm going to show you the new disc first. So it's just the same that Laurie showed you. You would go to 6x10 folder and just double click on it. It opens up, and again we have the same folders. So I'm going to go to directions and double click on it. Same set of directions right there, just the Welcome Autumn 6x10. Double click on that and it will open your Adobe Reader, and then you can print it from there. So let me show you while that's opening. The older disc, like I said, the files are all the same. So on the older disc, you just pick 6x10 and double click on it, and then just right there it has the directions, Welcome Autumn 6x10. So you just double click on that and it opens up your Adobe Reader right here, and you just go hit File and Print and choose your printer and say print. So very, very similar process.
Awesome. That is perfect.
Yeah, that's
So
perfect.
that's how you would get started with that part of it. So we did talk about hoop size requirements. Do you want to tell us about some of our other products that we have that use a different size hoops?
Sure. So our bench pillow series, you can tell like some of these pieces on the bench pillow are quite large, and they were designed originally for sewing. And so when we digitized them, we had to find different ways to make them work in embroidery hoops. So you'll find very small differences between the machine embroidery versions and the sewing versions, just because they were designed for sewing first, not with the dimensions of a hoop in mind. Some of our later bench pillows, since we've gotten into machine embroidery, were designed more with hoop sizes in mind. So these ones all require you to have a 6x10 hoop or larger with the older bench pillows. Some of our newer bench pillows, like in Jingle All the Way and Hello Sunshine, both have a bench pillow in it, and those you can make with a 5x7 hoop. So there may or may not be, or maybe another bench pillow coming that will also use your 5x7. So,
Maybe.
just maybe.
Maybe.
So feel free to guess
Yeah.
what bench pillow you think is coming next.
Yeah, there you
Maybe
go.
there is one.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Does that excite you? That's
Yes,
exciting, isn't
it's
it?
so exciting.
All right. So once we've printed out our instructions, the first thing I like to do is kind of read through your instructions. It's so important to know what you're going to be doing. The first thing, and I think we already went over this, was on your embroidery files. You're going to have this selection of embroidery files, and like I talked about, some of them will be 6 by 10, but others will be different size hoops. But you still are going to use those size hoops. And Jeanette's going to explain why would we choose a 4 by 4 hoop? Why couldn't we use a 6 by 10 again, right?
Right. So you always want to use the smallest hoop possible when you're stitching embroidery work because it helps support your stitches. So even though you have to have the 6 by 10 hoop in order to make this set of directions, you would want to hoop other parts of it that will fit in a smaller hoop in the smallest hoop possible, just so that your stitches turn out as beautiful as possible.
There you go. And I'm excited to make this. I've already started it, and it's lots of fun. I have made some of the other bench pillows, and the very first time I went to make my bench pillow, I was like, I have to mark on my fabric. Kind of scary. But if you look at this as there's just parts, part 1, part 2A, part 2B, there's a reason those are labeled that way. So after you read through instructions, you can see for the autumn pillow, and I've already got it ready here, your first thing you're going to do is take and cut your middle fabric. And then you're going to cut your other blocks of fabric. And once those are ready, it says right here, now you're ready for machine embroidery. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to mark that first piece of fabric so we know where to make all of these hoops. And we are going to start out with, I wanted to show you this diagram. This is a really important diagram right here. So the very first thing is, if you note that you're marking these numbers, and this is where you're going to mark these numbers, and the crosses. And it's basically, you're going to draw a vertical line according to this and a horizontal line according to this. So let me show you how I'm going to go about doing that. The very first thing to note is I take my fabric and I put on the back of it, and this is really, really, really important to do, put some kind of stabilizer, not just your hooping stabilizer, which would most likely be tearaway, but I put a woven fusible, you can call it mesh fabric. It feels just like fabric. It would be something similar to Shapeflex. There's a lot of other brands out there that carry the same product. This one is from OESD. It's a fusible woven, it's a really good one too. Please line the back of your center fabric with that. It's really important to do. The second thing that I did is, once I did that, I folded this in half and I ironed a seam, and then I traced that seam so I had exactly my middle, and then I did the same thing across the center. So I've got these 2 grids right here. Now the most important thing is those 2 grids, and then the very next thing I did is I marked the top of my fabric top. If you get this moved around while you're making your marks and then you start marking the wrong grid on the wrong corner, that's not going to be very happy. So the very first, I didn't mark the first couple because I was going to show you how I would go about doing that. The best way for me to think about this is, I'm facing it right here. If it says left edge or right edge, it's either the left or the right side of this line. So the very first one is left edge. So I'm going to go onto the left side of my fabric, and then I'm going down. So here's my center line. I'm going to be down. So I know that this first marking is going to be in this lower corner right here. And that's the best way to think about it, is left or right, up or down. Locate the quadrant you're going to make this mark in. Now it says left edge, so it's right against the left edge, and you'll get to see why next week, why that's right up against the edge. It's one of our hooping techniques, and that's why it's right against the left edge. And then I only come down 3/4 of an inch. Now the reason I wanted to do this is because my line that I'm drawing is going to be horizontal, because it says right here, I'm going to draw a line 3/4 of an inch down, and it's going to be horizontal. So I liked this ruler just for the fact of I could find my 3/4 mark pretty easily. I'm gonna flip it around so that black line isn't in the way. And then I just mark, I put my blue line right there on the 3/4 inch, and I know that this is at the 3/4 inch. And I'm gonna carry it right there to the edge. Now the marker I'm using, it's a water soluble. I wouldn't get one that irons, because if you happen to iron, you're gonna lose your mark. And then I draw my line at 3/4 inch down. And the very first thing I'm gonna do is, this is 1. This is part 1. It's really important to label these. And the reason you wanna label this is that when it says part 1, I go back here, part 1, this is the file that I'm gonna stitch out right here on that line, part 1. So your markings here are gonna match every one of your files that you're gonna stitch out. All right, so now we're gonna go to part 2. Now part 2, it's broken down in part 2A and part 2B. And so they're both on the left-hand side, so that's on this side, and they're both up 2 inches, so there's up 2 inches. Now I already have 2B done ahead of time, but 2A is not yet marked, and 2A is 8.5 inches this way to the left, so 8.5 inches over and 2 inches up. And interestingly enough, I should say, you can see that 2B is also 2 inches up. So what I would have done if I was marking these both at the same time, I would look at my line, and it's supposed to be 2 inches up. The first one is 3.5 inches over. So right here at 3.5, I made my first line, and I drew this line all in one. And then over here, I'm gonna do the same thing. It's 2 inches up, right, which I've got right here, and I'm going at 8.5 inches. So here's my 8, because I have it lined up here as well. I go over to 8.5, and there's my 8.5 inch line, and I know that I want my crosshair to be somewhere across that 8.5 inch, so that's my horizontal line. And then I'm gonna come back, and I've already marked my 8.5 inches there, and so I'm gonna make my vertical line. Now, the reason I like this particular ruler, if you can see, I was able to line this up right on that line, so I know this is gonna be a straight line up and down. You don't have to make it that big. You can make it that big if you'd like, because you're gonna be hooping a different method on this second part. So this is gonna be a different hooping method than this will be. Now, we know this one is 2A, and we've got 2A marked, and I now have 2B marked. And then if you keep going over here, I've already marked 3A and B, and 4A, B, and C. So next week, we're gonna show how fun that we're gonna show the different ways of hooping these. And I think that there's 3 methods, and I was gonna let Jeanette kind of just pre-explain those 3 different ways in just a second. And I'm gonna show you one other thing that I like to do. So now that I have all of my marks on my fabric, I look at this diagram. This is a great diagram in the instructions, and it shows you, do I have mark 1 and do I have it marked? Yes. Is 2A, look where it's supposed to be? Yes. 2B, yes. And so forth and so on. And then I've got 3A, 3B, and I've got these 4 marked. So that I know that all of these match everything that's on the diagram. So when you go to pull up your file, the coolest part is I like to write over here now what file I'm pulling up for that particular hooping. So I know that this one's going to be my 6 by 10 inch part 1, and then I get my hoop ready, and I'm ready to go. And I also get to look and say, oh look, it's going to be a squirrel. This should be the squirrel that I'm going to be hooping. And so when you're going to your file and you've got it pulled up on your computer, up on your sewing machine, you should be finding the squirrel, and that's how you'll double check and say, yep, I'm stitching out the right thing in the right spot. So that would be something I would find important. That's what I like to do, is write my file that I'm gonna be pulling up over those numbers on my paper. And I'm gonna let Jeanette explain the 3 different hooping types just to start with.
Okay, like just really fast, because this is what we're going to talk about mostly next week. So on all of the embroidery file discs, there is a document that you can see is called, it's right here, I got highlighted on this one, it's called Read First, Hooping 101 and SVG File Tips. So for next week, it would be very helpful if you have that printed so that you could refer to it when we talk about our three main different ways to hoop. So we have our regular traditional way that we hoop, which is you hoop the fabric and the stabilizer together. And then we have a modified traditional where your fabric doesn't quite cover the whole hoop, and so we have a way that we do that. And then we have a third way that we call placement line hooping. So we'll cover all of those next week.
So that you can make any one of these bench pillows. Even though we're just showing you the autumn one, we're going to show you that way. There's one other trick or tip, if you will. Not every bench pillow has you just get the middle piece ready. Sometimes you need to do a little bit more.
You do. So if you look at this disc, this is the Let's Go Fly a Kite bench pillow. If you notice, some of the parts of the machine embroidery actually go over the borders of the fabric. So before you hoop it and do all of the embroidery, you actually have to put the borders on first. So you just have to make sure that you read your directions so that you know whether you have to sew the bench pillow together first before you actually start machine embroidering.
Yeah, we have a little example of this.
So here's the center.
This is when I started.
And then the borders, you can see these were made in your hoop. So we tried so many ways, like all of the little pieces and parts that are extras on these bench pillows, we tried to put as many of them in the hoop as possible. So the flying geese go in the hoop, and like the braid border goes in the hoop, even on the autumn bench pillow. The orange pill blocks you make in the hoop. Anything we possibly could put in the hoop, we just did it so that you could just do it all in your embroidery machine as much as possible.
And then you would sew these top and bottom, and then that's where your kite goes on.
And then you would start making your marks on the
on your fabric.
On the fabric.
And where do you find CDs for these?
At your local quilt shop.
Find your local quilt shop, yes. And if you don't know where your local quilt shop is, or if you're trying to find a local quilt shop, if you go to our website, we have a store locator that will help you locate the stores near you.
There you go.
And if you have any other questions, please let us know. And we hope to see you next week for
Hooping.
Right? More fun,
Part
for
two.
stitching, part 2. Thank you so much for joining us.